All right, one of my favorite topics. All right, just putting these in front of you, would you be able to tell me the difference between this microphone and this microphone? If not, don't worry about it. I'm going to show you guys. What's going on, guys? I'm John from Hobbyist PCs, and today I'm going to be telling you guys the difference between a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone. This is something that you're probably going to run into whether you're a streamer, maybe you want to get into recording music, or perhaps you're just someone who wants to invest into some better audio equipment. This is probably a decision that you're going to run into eventually. Now, before we get started here, I have to mention this is the third time I've attempted to record this video, and unfortunately, it was due to some unforeseen mistakes, so why don't we just go ahead and just get right into it. So the first thing I want to go over here is a condenser microphone. This is a very common microphone that you might find if you're a streamer. They're pretty easy to come across. Microphones like the AT2020 or even the Blue Yeti, those are condenser microphones. Now, this one is a Shure KSM27. It's a discontinued model. You cannot buy it new anymore. However, you can find the equivalent of it, the SM27, for around the same price as this used to originally cost. They're pretty similar microphones. There are some fundamental differences between a condenser microphone and a dynamic microphone, and it has to do with the construction of the diaphragm on the inside of it. What you're looking at on the screen right now is the capacitor itself, and it consists of a housing, a diaphragm, a thin diaphragm at that, and a backplate. Basically, the way that this works is the distance between the backplate and the diaphragm, as that changes whenever sound hits that diaphragm, it will generate an electrical signal that can be translated into audio. Now, I should also mention one really important thing that you definitely might want to know if you're going to be plugging one of these microphones into an audio interface is that these microphones typically require what's called phantom power. All phantom power does on an interface is that it runs an electrical charge to whatever device is connected to an XLR connection into that audio interface. It will allow you to power that device without having to use another source like an adapter to run power to the microphone. Or in some cases, some condenser microphones actually require you to put a battery inside of it. This one doesn't require it because it runs on phantom power. However, that is the function of phantom power. It takes away the necessity of having to use a battery to power your microphone. Now, another thing that I should probably note about condenser microphones is that, for one, they're extremely sensitive. They can pick up a lot of really subtle sounds, room noise, room reflections, all sorts of things like that. It's basically because of how thin the diaphragm is inside of that capacitor. One other thing that I should note about condenser microphones, especially considering that they have a thin diaphragm, is that you have to be very careful with the volume of the audio source that is being picked up by it. If you have a really loud source that is being picked up by a condenser microphone, you want to be very careful because you can actually damage the microphone if you have too loud of a source going into it. So make absolutely sure that in your use case, if you're going to be using the condenser microphone, that you either have what's called the pad, which is located on the back, turned on when you're recording a loud source. Make sure you reasonably distance it from the source. You don't want to be talking right into it like that. It's not good. And you also want to make absolutely sure you're just being careful with it. You don't want to drop this thing. These aren't necessarily durable microphones. Be very careful with these. And the last thing I probably want to mention about them is that they have a fairly high output compared to dynamic microphones. So you won't need to have another preamp or something to boost the signal coming from the microphone to get ample signal going into your interface. Now let's move on to dynamic microphones. What I've got here today is a Shure SM7B, and it's probably one of the most common broadcasting mics you'll see on radio shows, podcasts. It's just well known for that, but it can also be used for a wide variety of other things like recording vocals. Very much the same thing as a condenser microphone. Don't ever think that a microphone is used for anything specific. However, they do have certain strengths that work better in certain situations, so make sure you keep that in mind. Dynamic microphones have a completely different construction. So the way they do have a diaphragm on the inside, and attached to that diaphragm is a coil. Now, that coil is surrounding a magnet on the inside that is charged. This charged magnet will generate a signal whenever the coil moves around that magnet. And basically that signal that is generated from the movement of the diaphragm moving the coil around the magnet generates a usable signal that can be run into an interface or some sort of amplifier. Now, a couple of things to note about dynamic microphones. For one, that they're extremely rugged. You can get as loud as you want into these things, and you will not damage these microphones. You could possibly even drop these things on the floor, and they will probably survive it, although I don't recommend that you do that because you could risk damaging the housing of the entire microphone. You don't want that. But the other thing to note, too, is that because they have thicker diaphragms, much thicker than condenser microphones, they're not quite as sensitive. They don't have quite the range that a condenser microphone would have in terms of its EQ profile. So a lot of the times, like, these might sound a little duller in comparison to condenser microphones. Condensers are excellent at picking up high frequency sounds, but that doesn't mean that these things can't sound amazing. Trust me, you have to consider their use case. Like, for example, if you were to take this microphone and move it further away from you, you might notice a drastic difference in sound change. Whereas with a condenser microphone, it would take a much greater distance to notice that because of its sensitivity. One last thing I should probably mention about dynamic microphones is that they have a very low output. So a lot of the times you have to get something like an extra preamp or what I would call a cloud lifter, which is something that you can see. It's that blue box that you see in the background. It's right on top of that interface over there. What it does is it boosts the signal coming from the microphone going into the interface. If I didn't use that, I might have to turn the preamp up so high on the interface that the noise floor becomes exposed, which is this sort of hissing sound that you hear in the background. It's something that's really annoying and just makes audio sound terrible. So that's something that you should probably consider if you're considering whether or not to buy a dynamic microphone or buy a condenser, is if you don't have the money lying around to get yourself something to boost the signal from the dynamic microphone going into the interface, then you might want to consider maybe just getting a condenser microphone instead. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get some things set up so that way we can start the test. I do want to note one thing. Like I said, I've tried to record this video a couple of times already. I'm not going to create a completely identical environment in terms of the test. When I tried it last time, the sound difference was so drastic that I had to re-record it. And what I mean by that is that I tried to record these at the same distance from each other, and the sound of the dynamic microphone was so noticeably massive that it wasn't really a fair comparison. So what I'm going to be doing in this case is I'm going to keep the dynamic microphone closer to me to try to get it to sound similar to the condenser microphone so that you can try to hear the subtle differences between the two more accurately. Okay, so starting things off here, we've got the Shure KSM27 condenser microphone. I should mention right off the bat, what you're hearing is the raw audio. I'm going to be level matching the two side by side. And I should also mention that I'm using a pop filter here in this case. If you don't know what a pop filter is, it's used to kind of filter out the plosive sounds, the P's, the T's, the B's, that project a lot of air going into the microphone and helps to cut out that ugly sound that you hear whenever you hear those sounds. And it just makes the signal sound cleaner. So that's why I'm using a pop filter in this instance. Now, the other thing I should also mention too is that I have the mic at a distance of about 6 to 8 inches from my mouth. It's going to be done differently with the dynamic microphone. So the idea here is to try to get pretty much, I guess, the tone to be as similar as possible. That way you'd be able to hear the subtle differences between a dynamic microphone and the condenser a lot better. But I will also be doing a distance test during this. So you're going to be hearing the difference that you would hear in the condenser microphone as well as the dynamic microphone when I change the distance from the source. So we're going to go ahead and just start this test off. Like I said, the first thing I'm going to start off with is the distance test. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move the mic further away from me. You can hear me right now. It's about, I don't know, I'd say it's almost about 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from me. That's a guess. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move it closer back to where it was. Somewhere around here. That's about 6 to 8 inches. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the off-axis test. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk into it off-axis like this. I'm kind of not talking into it. You can kind of hear how it picks up. I'm going to talk directly in its direction like this. I'm going to continue talking as I move over to the other side. That way you can kind of hear it a little better. But you can kind of hear its performance off-axis. Might be noticeable to some, might not be too noticeable to others. But, excuse me there. Hopefully that kind of paints a better picture for you guys. Now I'm going to go ahead, we're going to do my line that I'm going to be using to do a side-by-side comparison between the two microphones. This is a side-by-side comparison of the KSM27 and the Shure SM7B. Okay, so now I've got the Shure SM7B. As you've noticed, I have the mic much closer to me. in my opinion, one of the best ways to use the microphone if you're going to be using it for vocals. And I tried my best to get the tone as similar between the two microphones as I can, but you should still notice the difference between the two microphones. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and continue. Once again, this is the raw audio, not processed. All I did was level match the two sources. No plugins whatsoever. I'm going to go ahead and start with a distance test. As I start moving the mic further away from me, you might start to notice that it sounds more hollow and the volume gets drastically lower. This is something that I've noticed in the last test. As I bring it back closer, the tone starts to get right about where it should be. Now, with this microphone, you can get pretty damn close to it, and it still sounds pretty good. But now I'm going to go ahead and start with the off-axis test, and you might notice something interesting about this. As I start going off-axis, you might notice that it still performs pretty well. As I'm moving over to the other side, I'll go ahead and just do this one more time. As I keep talking, you can hear the difference in the sound as I move off-axis. It might sound probably no different. It might sound drastically different, or it might just sound subtly different, but that's just one thing I wanted to point out with the difference between these two mics. With the condenser, you can't quite have it as close, but this one you can get very close to it, and you'll really notice the way it picks up the sounds. Now let's go ahead and continue with the comparison test. This is a side-by-side comparison of the Shure SM7B and the KSM27. This is a side-by-side comparison of the KSM27 and the Shure SM7B. This is a side-by-side comparison of the Shure SM7B and the KSM27. This is a side-by-side comparison of the KSM27 and the Shure SM7B. That, of course, concludes our testing here. Who do I recommend these mics to? Who should buy what? Well, let's start with the dynamic microphone. When it comes to dynamic microphones, I say dynamic microphones are probably best suited for people who might have a loud dynamic range. So if you're the type of person that might go from going really quiet to really loud, this is a perfect microphone for that. That's mainly because when you get to those loud parts, you don't have to worry about potentially damaging the microphone and not having to compensate the volume on the fly, or maybe even have to record those parts separately at a different volume. It just makes the recording process a little easier in that aspect. Not to mention, because of the durability of these things, you can get kind of rough with them. What would I also recommend with these things? I would also recommend that if you're going to get a dynamic microphone, make sure that you keep it fairly close, because as you probably noticed in the test, the difference when you move it further away from you is pretty drastic and not necessarily flattering for your voice, at least in my opinion. And lastly, when it comes to dynamic microphones, if you have room in your budget to get something to boost the signal from the mic itself, then this is a perfect fit for you. I would also recommend, if you're a streamer, make sure you get a mic arm like you see in the back here. A mic arm will help suspend it so you can put it closer to you and not have to hang it like above your monitor. So I should also keep in mind that if you're the type of streamer that doesn't like having a microphone in your shot for your camera, then I would actually recommend not getting a dynamic microphone. I would recommend possibly looking into getting a condenser microphone. Speaking of condenser microphones, I would say that the condenser microphones are best suited for, I want to say, budget conscious people. And the reason why I say that is there seems to be what I see as a wider selection of budget condenser microphones than there are dynamic microphones that I would consider worth it, depending on the use case. So let's say I'm in the context of being a content creator or a streamer, I would say that condenser microphones are a really safe buy. For one, like, you have a lot of flexibility where you can position them. You can put them off axis for the most part. You can put them further away, and they're pretty good at picking up a good full tone of your voice from far away. So if you wanted to put your condenser mic above your monitor, or you wanted to put it like off to the side, but not like in your face, you want to keep it out of the shot, then a condenser microphone's a great choice. However, if you're in a situation where you have a lot of background noise, if you're the type that doesn't like to get key presses into the audio and it's really hard to filter out, then a condenser microphone is going to pick up all that stuff, and it's going to be really difficult for you to filter that out. That's where you're really going to have to get your mic positioning game on, which, by the way, I will be making a video on that pretty soon. Also, when it comes to condenser microphones, if you're the type that likes to get very loud, if you're a content creator or a streamer and you have a lot of excitable moments where you're getting really loud and maybe you like to get tilted or whatever, it's probably not a good idea to go with a condenser microphone, because you're probably going to end up damaging the microphone at some point just from the volume of your voice alone. So I would highly suggest maybe looking into a dynamic microphone if you're that type of content creator or streamer. And of course, going back to price again, you don't need to have to worry about getting something to boost the signal going into something like an audio interface like the one I have back here. That is, of course, if you don't like the sound of the preamps in your audio interface, maybe go buy a preamp to help complement that condenser microphone a little better. But because of their higher output, you don't have to worry so much about the noise floor of your interface being exposed when you turn the volume up. Not to mention that a lot of USB microphones that are out there are condenser microphones as well. For example, the Blue Yeti is a fairly affordable condenser microphone that does the job pretty well for a streamer. And if you know what you're doing with plugins and whatnot, you can get a really good sound out of it that people will enjoy listening to on your streams. So more budget conscious people who want something that's more ready to go, maybe consider getting a condenser microphone that is maybe even possibly USB as well. And that just wraps up this discussion, tutorial, whatever, comparison is probably the best way to put it. Let me know what you thought about this video. Please be sure to like, share, and comment down below. Tell me about your experiences. Which one did you guys think sounded better? Which one would you prefer on your stream or in your content or perhaps in your recordings? I want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Also, be sure to check the description. I have my various social media pages as well as a link to my Discord where you can go ahead and chat with me directly. And I also stream twice a week on Twitch as well. I like to stream on Twitch because it's a great way for me to interact with people, and just Twitch offers a lot in terms of interaction for my viewers. So I encourage you to go check out the Twitch page if you want to chat with me live. If you would prefer not to go on Twitch, then the Discord is the next best place to go. It's also a great place to get tech help as well. I have a great community in there that loves to help people out with their PC builds. So please go down there and check that out if you can. And of course, lastly, I do have a merch page as well. I do have coffee mugs and t-shirts available for sale. So if you check the link down below in the description, you can go check that out. See if you can find something you like, rock something with the logo on it, show your support for the channel. All of the donations and the money that I get from the products that you buy go into helping improve the stream, whether it's getting new cameras, getting better PC equipment so that I can provide better streams and better video quality, and maybe someday I can afford something like a better lens and maybe a better camera. So I appreciate all the support you guys give me. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a pleasant day, everyone.